This is your World War III update. Here's what's going on. I haven't been posting frequently because I've been on vacation. And one of the first rules of prepping is you never tell anyone when you're on vacation. You only post about it on social media when you get back. So needless to say, I'm now back from vacation. And it was an interesting one. A lot of prepping lessons, social, psychological in nature, were learned. More on that in a future video. Now, since I've been gone, I've been updating you guys periodically. You wouldn't have known it because, of course, once again, I don't let you know if I'm on vacation. But today I got back and it turns out that Trump is going to be contracting the timeline for the ultimatum given to Vladimir Putin. It was initially supposed to be on September 3rd or before September 3rd. Now he's saying that he's moving the timeline up in the next 10 to 12 days, which will entail, if Russia does not make some sort of concession and agree to some sort of peace terms, which, as we're going to talk about, is impossible at this point in time for reasons we'll get into, then there's going to be more sanctions, secondary sanctions, or the 20th round of sanctions I think they're coming up on now, imposed on Russia. In addition to that, and more significantly, will be on Russia's trading partners, that Trump has threatened to slap a 100% additional tariff above and beyond any current standing tariffs that exist. We're talking about China and India, chief among those BRICS nations who buy Russian crude. Now, the reasons why the Russians cannot make any concessions in this conflict is, number one, that they know that they are in NATO's crosshairs. Ursula von der Leyen today said that they're more than willing to continue to pay 3 times the amount for natural gas, liquefied natural gas from the United States and oil, even if it breaks them financially. They used to, of course, get this at rock bottom prices, discounted prices. They probably would have got it dirt cheap through Nord Stream. So why are they committing economic self-deletion by cutting themselves off and burning the bridge to cheap Russian petrol? Well, it's because they think that they can actually take it all. You see, Europe in particular, but NATO in general, actually believe, and the only reason why they would be burning these bridges is if they genuinely believe that they can conquer Russia and the $75 to $100 trillion, or at least install a puppet government there that will play along and give them those things for pennies on the dollar. That's why they are making this current economic sacrifice. That's the only reason why. Russia knows that they are in the crosshairs of NATO. They know that they are, for the first time in history, as Sergei Lavrov recently indicated, fighting all of NATO. Never before has that been the case. In fact, of course, when they were the Soviet Union, they were much more powerful. In World War II, they had the Americans on their side. They had, Europe. It was just them, everybody basically against Germany. Well, now it's everybody against Russia. And they know if they relent, even for a second, NATO will use every opportunity that it can to arm Ukraine to a point where it is indomitable, if it isn't already. Now, we've heard from U.S. generals who are now saying that the strategy has changed with respect to weapons deliveries, that they're no longer going to be broadcasting the weapons that they send and the quantities of the weapons that they're going to send. Of course, they're trying to get all the weapons defense systems in there, the Patriot systems, so that NATO can have protective cover to move troops in when the time is right. But I would not be surprised if we don't see some long-range JASSM missiles or Tomahawk missiles fired from Ukraine into Russia to make a statement. Now, there's been some pretty aggressive bellicose rhetoric back and forth between both Trump and Putin's wingmen, Lindsey Graham and Dmitry Medvedev, respectfully. And this is different. This is new because there's never been this hostility towards Trump's team from Putin's team before, even if it is from Medvedev. So we've reached a new point. Now, here's what Trump said specifically with respect to the shortening of the timeline. I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 to 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting. I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made. So what type of concessions, if only symbolic, could Trump expect to see within this period of time? And if the Russians do extend an olive branch, will be that sufficient for Trump's ego to say, okay, we made some progress, ergo we can postpone the implementation of these sanctions, which would cause economic chaos around the world? Because again, these are sanctions which are going to be tariffs, essentially, that are going to be targeting China and India. So we'd be right back where we were in March. But above and beyond that, we'd be much closer to war on every front, because this brings us closer to day X. It's a hardening of the dividing lines in the sand. Now, Russia has temporarily had a gasoline export ban. They're currently struggling financially as well. And anybody who tells you they aren't, they're not really, sure on the whole. Is Russia going to be able to survive economically? Absolutely. They have everything they need to survive. That doesn't mean that people are going to become disenchanted and disgruntled with the current policies being enacted by Vladimir Putin that are causing this economic immiseration, thus creating the potential for people who are willing to defect if the price is right. So the more economic stress a nation is under, that's when you get the spies and the CIA and the MI6 go in there, do their thing, the SBU try to bribe people to defect and effectively, try to go against the national interest as it stands in the current government with Russia. So this ban on gasoline until August 31st, they're saying it's related to agricultural demand and other things, but it's likely just to alleviate some of the financial stress that people are under so they don't start to revolt. And of course, they're a long way away from that. But the thing is, with these types of authoritarian regimes, it's not really authoritarian, but authoritative, we'll say, is that you can have you really do need an 80% popularity rate is really like a 50% popularity rate. Because as quick as they, as much as they support Putin now, they can turn on a dime and things could get ugly, because the only way for revolution to happen is if it's swift and violent, right? Whereas with a democracy, you might only have democracy. Let's get real. You guys know what I mean. You've watched the channel long enough to fill in the blanks. But with a democracy, 50%, people have a little bit more time, right? They don't have to go to such extremes to make their voices feel heard. In Russia, you just can't protest. It's illegal to protest. Now, the Kremlin will give you good reasons as to why, because usually those protests are an attempt by a foreign entity to undermine the Russian government, which they usually are, right? Which is why they have to be more and more firm and autocratic in their methods as the economic stress starts to take its toll even more and more, and as they go deeper and deeper into these wars. Anyways, Russia knows that they're in the crosshairs, that if they relent at all Ukraine and NATO is going to do is continue to arm even more. And so they can't have a reverse gear unless some sort of concession is made on the part of Ukraine. Now, they may be willing to extend some sort of olive branch, if only symbolic, in order to temporize the issue a little bit more and buy a little bit more time for both sides so they don't have to utilize the nuclear option. But according to Nikolai Patrushev, who is one of Putin's chief advisors, he said something very interesting today, which echoes exactly what I've been saying this whole time. And this is very important. NATO's current actions strongly resemble the implementation of a full-scale attack scenario against Russia. What have I been saying? It's all recon by fire. They are slowly, incrementally surrounding Russia, putting all of the armaments in place and establishing a posture which is effectively going to be used as a springboard for some sort of decapitation strike, sussing out the defenses, utilizing artificial intelligence, the whole nine yards in order to do this blitzkrieg type attack on Russia. And if people think they're not crazy, they wouldn't do that. I mean, nobody really suspected that they would do what they did with Iran. I mean, we all know it was possible, but we didn't think it was just going to be so abrupt. I mean, I shouldn't say that because we've been talking about that happening, and obviously this is different, but what I'm saying is just because it's a gamble doesn't mean they're not going to do it, and they'll probably feel quite emboldened by the so-called success of that campaign that they would try something like this, because Russia, much like Iran and all these other countries, have yet to establish deterrence. And until they do put the foot down, they're not going to stop. Patrushev also says any military incursion into the Kaliningrad region would be met with an immediate response with all available forces and means. The Russians have also admitted on other forums that indeed NATO could likely take Kaliningrad if they wanted to. With conventional force, they likely could take it in a relatively short period of time. The problem is the nuclear one, okay? Clearly, Russia then would be in a position of, do we use our nuclear weapons? Is this exclave worth it? Now, I've made the argument in the past that they might actually be willing to let it go, believe it or not, because it's not really essential, right? It's not, if you're not even trading with Europe at all anyways, the only reason why it's essential strategically, I guess it's a warm water port, or is it? I don't even know if it's considered to be a warm water port, or if the Black Sea is considered their only warm water ports. Regardless, it's warmer than it is up in St. Petersburg, right? So it's important in the sense that they can launch their nukes and they can make way to their targets a little bit quicker. And, obviously it's important for trade and other things, just the population of people that they have there. It's a foothold into Western Europe. But it's also a big liability in a lot of ways. So could they just let it go? The problem is, if they let it go, then NATO's most certainly never going to stop. So they're going to have to establish deterrence somehow. And clearly, the Orezhnik demonstration has not sufficiently done that. So it's going to have to be something of a radioactive nature, if you know what I mean. Especially seeing as the U.S. is signaling with their nuclear weapons. And what I mean by that is apparently the C-17 military aircraft that flew the B-61-12 tactical nuclear bombs to the UK so that they could use their F-35A jets to deploy them, presumably on Russia. Well, they had their transponder on for that. And so this signals that they wanted the Russians to know that this was happening, that this was, a sign that the nuclear posture is definitely shifting. We've talked all about the shifts in nuclear posture from Russia not informing the U.S. as to the whereabouts of its mobile nuclear platforms in the game of cat and mouse as it's unfolding with that, thanks to the now defunct New START Treaty, as well as every other treaty, the deployment of long-range weapons, different types of missile defense systems, attacks on long-range radars, attacks on the nuclear triad, etc., etc. So, we're getting close. We're getting close to the big one. We don't know when it's going to be, but, it appears as though something has to give, right? We're about to reach that critical point where Putin and Trump tell each other to go fuck themselves. That point that I've been worried about ever since Trump took office, because I said when that happens, it's not just going to be some predictable gradual escalation. Things could take a turn for the worse very quickly, which is not to say Biden would have been better or Kamala would have been better, not at all. It's just, one is a bit more unpredictable than the other. There's also been some issues in Lithuania with respect to Russian drones flying from Belarus into Lithuanian airspace. Is this just an errant drone? Was it sent there perhaps redirected accidentally through electronic warfare, GPS spoofing? Was it hacked? These are things that have happened in the past. These drones have crossed over into Poland, into Romania, and now into Lithuania. And I think it's happened twice, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's happened twice in the last 72 hours. So is this telegraphing from Russia with respect to what's going on in the Baltics, where they're basically dismantling their highways into Russia. They're mining their borders, they're building bunkers, and they're preparing for war all along the Russian border while they welcome in German troops into the country. So, yeah, that's how it's going, guys. That's why we prepare for SHTF, and I can say so unabashedly. You know, there's this new movement in the prepping community where it's like moral grandstanding of sorts. It's like people virtue signaling, saying, well, we don't prepare for those one-off, catastrophic events. We just prepare for everyday crises, and we're just vigilant citizens. And it's like, okay, get some insurance, make sure the fridge is stocked up with groceries, get a decent EDC. Why do you even need a channel? Okay, I can proudly say that I'm preparing for the collapse of civilization. I mean, why else would you do any of this? Right? It just wouldn't make any sense whatsoever to invest so much time and energy into prepping, much less make a prepping channel. If you're just talking about putting a fire extinguisher in your house and having, a bug out bag at the door, like if that's the extent of your prepping, if that's, it's almost like they don't want to be associated with the real fringe elements of preparedness, which I get, but at the same time, when you look at it objectively speaking, those crazy preppers, like I think of the most fringe case, the guy who had the Doomsday Castle in the woods, which quite frankly was freaking awesome, okay? As a prepper, I gotta say, having a castle in the woods with all kinds of stuff, awesome idea. A bridge too far, perhaps, but, I will say that when I objectively look at the way a lot of other people are living that's deemed socially acceptable, I think one can make the argument that that's equally crazy. And I get that people are trying to curry favor by taking this contrarian view that I'm this prepping pragmatist, I only focus on EDC and things of a 95% likelihood. It's like, well, fuck, what do you even do? Why do you even have a prepper channel for that? And that's like common sense. You go type in ChatGPT, what do I need to do to prepare for 72 hours? ChatGPT will not only tell you exactly what you need to do in 5 minutes, you never have to watch another prepping video again. They will actually, utilizing the agent feature, go on the internet, take your credit card, buy everything you need, get it sent right to your house. You have to do absolutely nothing. You don't need us prepping channels only if you're prepping for the big one, right? So that's what I'm prepping for. Anyways, pardon the tangent. The Moscow Stock Exchange reacted. It was down 1.8% in just an hour, losing $1.4 billion in value following Trump's shortened ceasefire deadline. Yeah, that's what's going on. And there was this little spat between Lindsey Graham and Dmitry Medvedev. It's getting really dark in here. I might have to use my flashlight for this. Okay, Dmitry Medvedev drew first blood. He said, Trump playing the ultimatum game with Russia, 50 days or 10. He should remember two things. Russia isn't Israel or even Iran. Each new ultimatum is a threat and a step, I believe, towards ... That one got cut off, but use your imagination, towards the end of the world. Lindsey Graham responded to this, saying, to those in Russia who believe that President Trump is not serious about ending the bloodbath between Russia and Ukraine, you and your customers will soon be sadly mistaken. That's a pretty big threat. You and your customers will soon be sadly mistaken, of course, in reference to BRICS buying Russian crude. You will soon see that Joe Biden is no longer president. Get to the peace table. Again, what does that mean? Without the concession from Trump and NATO that they're actively trying to destroy Russia's economy, NATO, of course, is being used as a tool of encroachment in order to attrit Russia and defeat them strategically, as stated. The only reason why you would need NATO post-collapse of the Soviet Union is for that purpose, to ultimately get the resources that you currently covet in Russia. Now, Medvedev said the following in response to this, and this is why this is getting so serious. It's not for you or Trump to dictate when to get at the peace table. Negotiations will end when all the objectives of our military operation have been achieved. Work on America first, Gramps. So somewhat jovial, but also shots fired, right? So this is a first in the sense that I think this is the first time that Medvedev has went at somebody so close to Trump. He's went at people who are close to Biden all the time, but never have they really crossed that line into being openly hostile towards Team Trump. Now, this isn't directed at Trump directly, but it's directed at one of his closest friends and confidants. So I guess we're going to have to see what's going to happen in this 10 to 12 days. Again, anything can happen at this point in time. I suspect that the U.S. is going to green light deep strikes into Russia, and they're going to, because they feel emboldened by what happened with Iran, and they're going to expect that Russia is going to back down and, lose the game of nuclear chicken. I don't know. I just think that no matter what happens, when Russia or whoever uses the nuke first, there's going to be such widespread panic that it's going to be bad, even if it doesn't directly impact us. The panic that's going to ensue, the panic buying by all the people who think this prepping stuff is silly, it's going to be off the charts, but probably only for a few days, and people are going to get used to it, and they'll be like, oh, see, nothing ever happens. And then another one will get used, and they'll be like, oh, well, okay, that was a little bit more significant, but I'm kind of getting used to this low-yield tactical use of normalization of nuclear weapon thing. I think we can get the hang of this. And, and then we're into the everyday use of nuclear weapons, perhaps, or nuclear testing, or, just the normalization of nuclear use. I mean, they've been conditioning us for nukes for years, if you think about it. I mean, I watched the movie Terminator. They used a nuke. And, the guy just walks, was it Terminator Salvation that they used the nuke? And John Connor just walked away from the blast unscathed, no concern about fallout. They used it in Starship Troopers. They've been conditioning people to accept this idea of, employing nuclear weapons in everyday warfare for a long, long time. It's just that they've yet to pull the trigger. And I think that's what they're seeing, what Russia will do. And they probably have a lot of artificial intelligence being used to try to determine, will the Russians will they do a limited strike? What will they do exactly? And of course, Palantir is wired into everything. So I think they suspect that they can predict with a high degree of confidence what the Russians will do next. But the question is, we know that the Kasparov was beat by AI, a long time ago. The question is, are the Russians, who are great at chess, are they going to be able to beat Palantir? I keep saying I'm going to do a video on that. It's getting dark outside. I'm going to go in now, but I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Now that we're off vacay. Talk soon.